Hey there, it's Lara here with your weekly astrology video. This one's for the week of November 25th to December 1st, 2020. So welcome, thank you for being here. We have a lot to talk about, as per usual, it seems this year, right? You know, we're heading into the final month of the year and it's not going out quietly. There's a lot going on. We have, this week we have Neptune stationing direct on the 28th. We have an eclipse on the 30th, and we have Mercury entering Sagittarius on the 1st. So we're going to focus mostly on the eclipse, the lunar eclipse that's happening in Gemini on Monday, November 30th at 4:29 a.m. Eastern Time. We will focus on that mostly. I will take you through each of the signs and speak to you about what area of life or what areas of life this eclipse is showing up for you in, is lighting up for you. And but before I do that, there's a couple of other things like I mentioned. And I'm going to spend a little while talking about Neptune in this video as well, in combination with the eclipse, because Neptune is in a square to the nodes at the time of this eclipse, and Neptune will have just stationed direct. So this is all relevant and significant. There's a lot of things when I was looking at the chart and everything that was going on, there's a lot of things I could have pulled out to talk about. There's conversations with Chiron going on. Uranus is involved here. In a quincunx to the sun, which can be a bit difficult to navigate, right? A bit uncomfortable, a bit like it will require some creative problem solving to work out that energy. But when I looked at the chart, I was like, this is, to me, the piece I really want to focus on is Neptune and the square to the nodes. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk to you about in this video. And I'm sure, other astrologers, if you listen and read other astrologers, they'll bring other pieces of the puzzle into the equation as well. But, all right, so let's start out with where the moon is at, which is what I always do. The moon, as I'm recording this on Wednesday, the 25th, is in Aries, right? The cardinal fire sign of Aries. And so that's a very action-oriented sign. And when, in all of 2020, when the moon moves through a cardinal sign, one of the four cardinal signs, which happens 4 times a month, we get this reminder of, that big restructuring that's been going on in Capricorn, and it draws, that into our awareness in some way. Then we have the moon entering Taurus on Friday. And, if you are somebody who is celebrating some sort of Thanksgiving, in the U.S., I know it's U.S. Thanksgiving. If you're doing some sort of holiday kind of ritual or celebration, a Taurus moon is really great time for some yummy food and just cozying up. And maybe eating dinner in your pajamas, that kind of thing. And then we've got the moon moving into Gemini on Sunday, and we'll have that eclipse on Monday. So, but before the eclipse, Neptune stationing direct, right, on the 28th. And right after the eclipse, just something I'll mention briefly here is that Mercury is moving out of Scorpio finally and into Sagittarius on December 1st. So we'll notice a shift in our thinking and our communications in general, right? With a move from the deep, dark, intense waters of Scorpio to the sort of fiery, mutable energy of Sagittarius, our thinking, our communications takes on a more optimistic flavor. Big picture, the big picture is more what we tend to focus on in Sagittarius. More philosophical sort of conversations and thinking. We can be focused on issues around justice and morality. We can be trying to persuade other people of our viewpoint. And, on the shadow side, if we take that too far, that can be self-righteousness and sort of getting up on our soapbox and that kind of thing, right? As well. That's Mercury in Sagittarius. Not going to really spend too much time on that, but it was, I did want to note it. We talked a lot about Sagittarius in last week's video because the sun moved into Sagittarius, right? And so if you want to hear more about Sagittarius, then listen to that video. We're going to focus more on Gemini in this video because that's where the eclipse is happening. And we're going to talk also, like I said, about the Neptune piece. So in any kind of eclipse, the nodes of the moon are always involved, right? So if we have a lunar eclipse, which we're having on the 30th, that's always a full moon, when the sun and the moon are opposite the sky. When we have a solar eclipse, which is happening on December 14th in Sagittarius, we have a new moon. It's always a new moon. But the nodes of the moon are always involved because what makes an eclipse happen, just to put it really basically, is when the moon is close within a certain number of degrees to her nodes, to the nodal axis, right? Which are 2 points in the sky. And so, that's what causes an eclipse. And the closer they get together, the closer the moon gets to the nodes, the more total the eclipse is. So this eclipse happening on the 30th is a partial lunar eclipse. The one in December is a total solar eclipse, right? But we won't get ahead of ourselves here. We're going to focus on one thing at a time. So I'm going to show you the chart before I go any further. Here's the chart for the eclipse on November 30th, 4:29 a.m. Eastern time. And that is happening between 8 and 9 degrees Gemini. The sun is going to be in Sagittarius, right? There's the sun in Sag at 8 degrees, close to the south node in Sagittarius, which is at 19 degrees at the time of the eclipse. Across the sky is the moon in Gemini at 8 degrees, close to the north node in Gemini at 19 degrees, right? So there's this opposition happening. The sun and the moon are opposite each other. And that's what makes a full moon. And because the nodes are in close proximity, that's what makes an eclipse. So, and then I said to you, Mercury will be moving out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius, right? But there's Neptune over in Pisces at 18 degrees. At the time of the eclipse, it will have just stationed direct. So we're going to talk about that. And it is in almost an exact square to the nodal axis. That is significant. Right, 90-degree angle to the nodal axis. We also have, I put on the chart here, asteroid Vesta is in Virgo opposite Neptune and Pisces, also squaring the nodal axis to a lesser degree, but nevertheless still. So those are the pieces that I really wanted to pull out of the chart to talk about. So as I was saying, a lunar eclipse is always a full moon. And a full moon is when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky. And full moons are times when our emotions come to the surface, right? Things that are sort of under the surface bubble up. And we can have, some emotional sort of eruption sometimes. We can, things kind of come into our awareness that maybe we were stuffing down or not fully aware of, right? Full moons illuminate things. They bring things to a culmination point or bring things to fruition, bring things up that need to be released. Endings can happen at full moons. We can have... It's like the high point in the cycle, right? The crescendo sort of thing before the energy starts to wane again. And so when we have an eclipse, this amplifies all of that energy, right? Sometimes you hear people say it's like eclipses are like, or lunar eclipses are like full moons on steroids kind of thing. So that's, and the other piece I want to mention is that oftentimes at full moons, we have issues around relationships come up because it's this opposition energy. The sun and the moon are opposite each other and they're facing off, right? And so there is a requirement to bring things into balance. And so sometimes balance needs to be disrupted before it can be, before equilibrium sort of can be restored. And so sometimes we there are issues around relationships that come up. And when I say relationships, keep in mind, I'm not just necessarily talking about a significant other. We are in relationship all the time with the people around us, with ourselves, with the planet. We're always in relationship. And so those issues can come to the surface. And because of the involvement of the nodes, there is something about the direction that we're going and the direction that, and where we've been, where we're going and where we've been. So the nodes of the moon, the North Node, which is currently in Gemini, which is where this eclipse is happening, right, is about our, the direction we're evolving towards. It's about what we, where we're headed. It's about the great unknown kind of thing, like what's over there that we haven't yet experienced, that we're being drawn to. In Jyotish or Indian astrology, it's the head of the dragon, right? The North Node, Rahu, is the head of the dragon, and it has this insatiable energy to it, right? It's just like wanting more and more and more all the time. So we have to kind of be mindful of that. It's like, I think about Gabor Mate, who you may or may not have heard of, and he is Canadian doctor who works on the the west coast of Canada, and he is an expert on, addictions and mental health, that sort of thing. And he wrote a book called The Realm of the Hungry Ghost, right? And so the North Node energy in Jyotish and in Indian astrology can have that energy to it, where it's just like we just can't get enough. But in Western, in modern Western astrology, we think of the North Node as our trajectory, as our where our soul is sort of headed, what it's craving, the horizon. And so, and then the South Node, where Sagittarius is, or it's in Sagittarius right now, is about that's the tail of the dragon, right? What we want to release, what we want to move away from, what is being purged, let go of, that sort of thing. Been there, done that. We've learned those lessons, and now let's, move in the other direction. And so there is something about that's that trajectory that is highlighted around eclipses, about the path, the evolutionary sort of path that we're on. And there's also, eclipses are a time where there's a sense of sort of fatedness around eclipses, like things are happening that we're not necessarily in control of. It often plays out that way, or has that sort of an energy. And it's quite literally like the light changes at an eclipse, right? The sun and the moon are luminaries. And when we have an eclipsing of those luminary, of the light, it's like I always use the analogy where it's like we're in a room, somebody turns off the light, and then the light comes back on and the furniture is all rearranged. And it's like things do not look the same. That's the energy of an eclipse. And, it can be sort of like, if it's not literal, physical changes in the material world, it's like a shift in our perspective. Realizations, a sort of a sudden awakening that things are not what we thought they were. That sort of thing can happen. It's like hitting the reset button, right? Eclipses happen twice a year, and it's those times in the year when it's like the reset button is hit. And it's like when something, you always get the advice if your electronics are malfunctioning, the first thing to do is to unplug them and plug them back in, right? That's eclipse energy. And hope that a reboot happens and things function, function again or function better, sort of thing. So that's eclipse energy. And Neptune is playing a big role here because Neptune is stationing direct right before the eclipse, as I mentioned, and will be squaring the nodal axis. Now, in evolutionary astrology, when a planet squares the nodes of the moon, it's called a skipped step. So it's like, a square is a conversation of tension. And so when a planet, in this case Neptune, is in a square with the nodal axis, it's like, what direction are we going to go? It's like something can trip us up on our journey, right? On our path. It's like we have to assimilate this energy, right? So that we can move on. We have to work through whatever tension it is so that we can carry on. And if we're not aware, we can be sort of dragged back down into the past rather than moving forward. So that's sort of my take on it. So in this case, we've got Neptune in its home sign of Pisces. Neptune entered Pisces in 2011, and then it retrograded back and then moved back in 2012. But 2011, right around that time, is when we had the Fukushima nuclear disaster, right, happen. That's affected and still impacting our oceans, right? Very Neptunian imagery there. It gets into everything and you can't separate it, right? Neptune is the planet of no boundaries. And so when we think of Neptune energy, boundaries is a big word, right? The dissolving of boundaries, and the awareness of where we need to set boundaries sometimes too, right? And so with Neptune squaring the nodes, there's this sort of tension between the past and the future happening, and that needs resolving. So Neptune is stationing direct at 18 degrees Pisces. It went retrograde on June 23rd at 20 degrees Pisces. So first off, let me say, this is not unusual. Neptune retrogrades every year for about 5 months at a time. But the thing is that Neptune's in its home sign. And it's playing a big role in the overarching, like the big picture changes that are going on over these years. And in the case of this eclipse, it's in this square to the nodes, like I said. So it's really kind of amplified energy. If you have any significant placements between about 15 and 18 degrees Pisces, then you're having a Neptune transit. I'm one of those people. My sun sits at 17 degrees Pisces. And, among other things, it's been like last year, I think, was kind of worse because it was exact, but it's still close and it's retrograded back within 1 degree of my sun, right? And so I've noticed whenever a planet stations, it slows down. So the energy is amplifying, and we're feeling that right now. And this last couple of days, it's just been like a little bit kind of out there, and I've been feeling a bit spacey. I've had headaches. I got my eye issue flared up again. I have, I'm having a little bit of trouble sort of keeping my feet on the ground. And so that it can amplify the energy. So if you've got planets 15, 18 Pisces, then you're having a Neptune transit, and this Neptune stationing direct will, you'll feel that more than most people. For most people, it's kind of this background, bigger picture energy. But also, if you have significant placements between 15 and 18 of the other mutable signs, which are Virgo, Gemini, and Sagittarius, right? You'll feel this as well. And Neptune is, among other things, about confusion and delusion, martyrdom, compassion, empathy. It's about our universal connection, right? And Neptune in Pisces, I think this period is really about the dissolution of boundaries. And we can see that in all kinds of examples where, if you think about the internet, right, for example, that dissolves the boundaries of communication, because we can communicate to people all over the world easily. And in a pandemic, also Neptune associated, right? Things spread out of control, no boundaries. You know, we're grateful to have that ability. There's also this idea that what impacts one of us impacts the rest of us, right? What impacts the planet impacts humans, and animals. So like we're all connected. And so there's that idea of the dissolution of boundaries. And I think the bigger lesson is to be wide awake to our human reality. Very Neptunian people can they don't really love being on planet Earth all the time, and it can be difficult to face reality because it's quite painful. They're quite absorbent, right? And it's hard for us to look at what goes on in the world and to not put rose-colored glasses on. And so there's a bigger lesson here, I think, for all of us happening right now. And there's something about this Neptune square the nodes at the time of this eclipse that's highlighting this for us. It's when Neptune stations direct, it's usually a time when we've seen the rose-colored glasses have come off during a Neptune retrograde. And we've gotten a bit of a wake-up call to reality, a bit of a, ooh. And so the challenge when Neptune stations direct is to not go back to sleep, to not put those rose-colored glasses back on, right? And to not avoid what's right in front of us and pretend that it's not there. And so it's like this, I think we're all learning this lesson, if we're willing to stay awake to the harsh realities of human existence. We are human beings, yes, having a spiritual experience, as the saying goes, but spiritual beings, but we are having a human experience, right? Had that flipped around. And, avoiding that doesn't often turn out well. I mean, look at I don't want to go into a big long rant about this, but, we are experiencing a major opioid crisis, like in my own city where I live. And that is this attempt at escaping reality, right? The painful reality. So that's just one example that comes to mind. So if we can stay awake to those harsh realities while still holding this Neptunian energy of compassion, of empathy, and understanding that we are all connected, that's ideal. That's ideal. Right? And so it's like Neptune squaring the nodes at the time of this eclipse. Are we going to crawl into a hole and, hide under a blanket and pretend that we haven't seen everything we've seen this year? Or are we going to say, okay, wow, that's harsh, but I'm going to try to, hold some sort of safe, brave space for that, and keep my eyes wide open and act with compassion and all of that. All right. So, oh my gosh, right? I still want to talk some more about Gemini, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to talk about Gemini next. I mentioned to you that Vesta is there in this square as well. And Vesta, just very briefly, right? Asteroid Vesta is the keeper of the sacred flame. So it's about, tuning into what is sacred to us, right? And I think that that's in tension with the nodes as well. And so we have that tension to work through as well, to decide sort of what we are devoted to, truly. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So this Gemini Sagittarius axis is the axis of the mind, and we spoke about that last week to some degree, so you can listen to last week's video as well. Whereas Sag is about the big picture, Gemini is more about, you know, the details, in the sense, not like Virgo details. Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo, right? But Gemini is about like collecting and disseminating the information, right? All the information. It's not necessarily about discerning what's worth keeping and what's not, or what's useful and what's not. It's about quantity over quality with Gemini. And so Gemini is curious, it's social, very adaptable, right? It's a mutable sign, intelligent, chatty, quick-witted, you know, communicative, all of these things. And then on the shadow side, Gemini can be ungrounded, right? It's an air sign, be sort of up in the head a lot, and can be scattered, superficial, a bit emotionally detached, sort of insincere, you know, kind of Gemini can have this gossipy quality to it, or just sort of telling people what they want to hear. And that's not always intentional. It's kind of like, well, I have this new piece of information, so now I think this. I talked to this person, so now I think that. You know, it's that kind of energy with Gemini. Gemini is like a busy street corner sort of thing, where or a busy marketplace, right? So picture that, where it's like people are chit-chatting all over the place, and you know, exchanging information. People are selling their wares. Everybody's trying to get your attention. All of that. There's so much to you know, vying for your attention, that it can be completely overwhelming, mentally overwhelming. And the Neptune energy there, you know, that can be overwhelm as well. That can add to that energy of overwhelm. And you know, because this full moon is happening in Gemini, there can be emotional communications, emotional conversations, or, you know, that communicating via technology piece. A lot of people are having, you know, distanced celebrations. You know, like I said, if you're in the US for Thanksgiving, and we're going into the holiday season in general. So, you know, you may be having your Zoom Thanksgiving, or that kind of thing, right? So the caution here is to try to keep your feet on the ground during this time. You know, it's not eclipses. This is a bit of a side note, but I think it's important to say eclipses are not generally time to do ritual and that kind of thing. You know, it's more of a time to just lay low and wait it out kind of thing, right? So, but there can be so much information coming at us right now that it can be quite overwhelming, right? So it could be a good time to maybe even take a break from technology at this time, if you can, or really be, you know, try not to be focusing on too many things at once. The last time we had a lunar eclipse in Gemini was in 2012. So November 28th, 2012, we had a lunar eclipse at 6 degrees of Gemini. So think back to that time for you personally. What was going on for you, right? There may be some recurring themes. Now, that's not to say the exact same thing's going to happen, but there may be some recurring things that can give you some clues as to what this energy is bringing about. If I remember, you know, 2012, around this time, we were all, you know, we were all talking about the Mayan calendar and how, you know, some people thought the world was going to end, right? Which never happened. So, you know, just something that came to mind when I was thinking about this. All right, so we're going to go through each of the 12 signs, and I'm going to speak to the house that this eclipse is happening for you. So the house that Gemini sits for you. And this is the area of life. These are the themes that the eclipse is calling into focus. That, you know, there can be this sense of shifting, you know, like shifting fate, or a sort of, like I said, somebody's unplugging the computer and plugging it back in, or that somebody's turning off the light and the light comes back on and things look different, right? Something's being eclipsed out. There's a shift of perspective of, something is changing in this area of life. And so, we're talking about, as I go through the signs, rising sign first and foremost, right, in this general forecast, and whole sign houses as well. So we're going to start with Gemini because this eclipse is happening in your sign, Gemini. And so this has to do, right, first house is about your physical being, your body, your vitality, your sort of who you are out in the world, how you present yourself, how the world perceives you, your trajectory, your instinctual responses to the world. And so there is, this sense of something shifting and changing here. There is, this could be a time, let's just take a quick example, where you are going to, you're making some sort of big change to your appearance, right? You're going to present yourself in a very different way, that sort of thing. And I wouldn't recommend making a decision to do that, around the eclipse, but it's like, it could be something that's sort of coming to reaching some sort of a turning point, right, in regards to that and to those kinds of themes. All right, so that's for you, Gemini. Definitely listen to the introduction. There's many more pieces, right, than this little snippet I'm giving you here. We're just focusing on what themes the eclipse is happening. Is centered around. So for you, Taurus, that is the second house, right? The eclipse is happening in your second house of your personal resources, of your money, your time, your energy, what you value, your sense of self-worth. So there is some sort of, shift in perspective, something changing, something's being eclipsed, the lights being turned off and on, and things look different in the light of day, sort of thing. And so something's being released in this area of life, potentially. And it's, it's a big change because eclipses bring about more amplified changes than just an average sort of full moon, right? All right, so that's for you, Taurus. Next, we've got Aries, where the lunar eclipse is happening in your third house. This has to do with your communications, your thinking, your perspective. It has to do with commerce and marketing and early learning. And it's like the third house is your immediate environment and the people in it, right? So that can be peers, cousins, neighbors, community members, that sort of thing, the people in your neighborhood. And so there is something being, something shifting here. There is a shift in the energy. There is something reaching this big culmination, crescendo point, and a perhaps change of direction in relation to these third house themes for you. So that's you, Aries. Next, we've got Pisces, where the eclipse is hitting your fourth house of your home, your family, your place of living, real estate, your sense of emotional security, these sorts of themes. And so for you, Pisces, there is something shifting and changing, at the time of this eclipse. It's like the light goes off and then it comes back on and things look different in that area of life in some way, shape, or form, right? So again, think back to the November 28th, 2012 lunar eclipse and think about what was transpiring around then for you. Next, we've got Aquarius. Aquarius, the eclipse is hitting your fifth house. This has to do with your creative self-expression, with what brings you pleasure, with how you shine your light in the world. It has to do with children and, issues around children. And so for you, Aquarius, those are the themes being called to the light, where and being sort of, like I keep using the analogy, the light goes off and then the light comes back on and things look very different in that regard. And it's revolving around fifth house themes for you. All right, next we've got Capricorn. Capricorn, for you, the eclipse is hitting your 6th house. So this has to do with issues around health and wellness, and your daily routine and work, how you are in service. That can be paid or unpaid work. Relationships between, subordinates and like people who are not on an equal playing field. So all of these themes are being focused on at the time of this lunar eclipse in Gemini, right? And so this is the area of life where the light's being turned off and back on again. And when the light comes on, things look different in this area of life. So that's for you, Capricorn. Next, we've got Sagittarius. Sagittarius, for you, the eclipse is happening in your 7th house. And so for you, this involves close personal relationships and potentially contracts and agreements when we're talking about the 7th house. So there's something in this area of life that is, the lunar eclipse is focused here, and there is some sort of a culmination or illumination. And again, to use the analogy, the light, gets turned off and then turned back on again. And when it does, something looks different, right? In this area of relationship. So that's for you, Sagittarius. Next, we've got Scorpio, where the lunar eclipse is hitting your 8th house, which is home to you, Scorpio. So you're familiar with these energies. But when the eclipse happens in your 8th house, this is a focus on your intimate connections, other people's resources, so other people's time, money, energy, how you merge with others. It's about what's going on in the depths of your psyche as well. And so when the light goes off and back on again, right, which is what happens at an eclipse, things can look very different in this area of life. And that's for you, Scorpio. Next, we've got Libra, where the eclipse is hitting your 9th house. So for you, Libra, this has to do with the bigger picture. It has to do with your philosophy, your belief system. It can have to do with travel, long distance travel, foreign people and places, and the things that you learn from that. Higher learning in some way. It's very much so these are the themes being called to the light, right? Excuse me. And it's like, as I use the analogy, the light goes off and then it goes back on again, and something having to do with these themes looks very different than it did before, right? So that's for you, Libra. Next, we've got Virgo. Virgo, for you, the eclipse is happening in your 10th house, which is a very public house, right? So it's about your public reputation and persona, your career trajectory, your worldly ambitions, the legacy you wish to leave, your relationship to authority and authority figures, your own authority, all of these things are being highlighted for you at the time of this eclipse. And so for you, Virgo, it's the light goes off and then it comes back on again, and something in this area of life having to do with these 10th house themes looks very different than it did before. Okay, next we've got Leo. Leo, for you, the eclipse is hitting your 11th house. This has to do with your friendships, with groups in general, associations, networks, even people you connect with on the internet. It has to do with your hopes and dreams for the future and the people that can help you get there. So this is the area of life that the eclipse is lighting up for you. And, when an eclipse happens, here we are, it's like the light goes off and then the light comes on. And for you, things in this 11th house area look different, right? Things look different. It could take a little bit to kind of get the lay of the land. So that's for you, Leo. And next we've got Cancer. Last but not least in this case. Cancer, for you, the eclipse is happening in your 12th house. So this is a very hidden house, right? It's where things go on behind closed doors, under the surface, maybe in the unconscious, maybe things we haven't been consciously aware of. This can have to do with how we sabotage ourselves, even in the 12th house, can have to do with our connection to our spirituality, the dream world, all of this sort of thing. And so for you, Cancer, it's like when the eclipse, happens, and keeping in mind that it's not just like that day and time, right? This is a eclipse season that we're in, that it's like the light goes off, and when it comes back on, something regarding these 12th house themes is illuminated for you. Right? So maybe something that was sort of in your subconscious comes to the surface, or something shifts in relation to 12th house. 12th house also in a more practical way can be about like places behind, that are tucked away from the world. So things involving, things like spiritual retreat centers, hospitals, rehab facilities, these sorts of things, right? Anything sort of tucked away from the world. So that's for you, Cancer. All right. That's all 12 signs. I know I said a lot here. I hope it made sense. This Neptune stationing is kind of making me a little bit loopy and foggy. I already have Mercury square Neptune in my natal chart. So this just amplifies that for me. And I wish you well. If you are celebrating, Thanksgiving or some sort of gratitude week, then I do wish you all the best. Stay safe. And I will see you next week, or I will see you before then on Facebook and Instagram. One other thing, if you're still here listening, thank you. One other thing I wanted to mention to you is that, if you like these videos and you find them helpful and the information that I put out, on social media and on my website and that kind of thing, and you want to show support, then of course the liking, the sharing, and all of that is really helpful. I also have something over on my website where there's a tab called Support the Work, and you can go over there and make a little donation. It's like buying me a coffee kind of thing. People do that sometimes, and I very much appreciate it. So thank you so much, and I will see you next week. Take good care. Bye for now.